There's a lot we can learn from world class athletes that we can implement into our lives to make our big quest happen. And joining us today, we have Ray Zahab. He's a Canadian explorer, an ultra distance runner, and a founder of a nonprofit organization called Impossible to Possible. This guy is incredible. So get ready for a great podcast. Hi, I'm Chris Reynolds, and I'm on a mission to help independent financial advisors build a better business through a remarkable client experience. In this podcast, you're going to learn how to do that from my conversations with the visionaries, the leaders, the independent advisors who are reshaping the future of the financial advice industry. At the end of each episode, you're going to walk away with an actionable idea that you can take and use right now, and it will help you to build a better business today. This is Turning the Page. Personally, I am fascinated by world-class individuals in any endeavor they choose. But athletes, they're a special breed, right? They overcome physical pain, mental anguish, and they keep going when others drop off. Just as an example, since he passed away, I've been seeing a ton of Instagram clips on Kobe Bryant pop up often, and it's always talking about his work ethic and what he did to become one of the best basketball players, not only of his generation, but I'd say of all time. It's the habits he built and the mindset behind it that was such an integral part of his success. He chose to be the best. He did what he had to do every single day to be the best, because that was his decision. And if someone doubted it, he did the work and continued to grow long after he was considered world class. And I find people who can suck up the pain, suck up the hardship, and carry on without complaint fascinating, especially in this world where excuses come easy. So there's a lot we can learn from world-class athletes, and we can learn from them how to implement these types of things into our lives to make our big quests happen. So recently, we had an individual who came to our summit and started talking about all the crazy things he did. And I'm like, this is a great example of what I admire in people, is this world-class mindset. So today, to talk about just that, is we have Ray Zahab. He's a Canadian explorer. I'm going to go through all his stuff, and it's going to take a while. He's a Canadian explorer, ultra distance runner. He's founder of the nonprofit organization Impossible to Possible. He's a recent recipient of the Meritorious, I'm going to get that right, Service Cross of Canada. That was a big word. He's also an explorer in the residence of the Royal Canadian Society. He's a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. He was recognized as one of the Canada's top explorers. He's got medals, and he's run over, and this is amazing, 17,000 kilometers across deserts, around cold conditions across the planet. To be honest, I'm just exhausted reading out all his accomplishments. As I said, he spoke at our last summit, and I thought this would be a great guest to have on our show. So Ray, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's great to be here.
So Ray, let's start with the basics. Tell your story. How did you get here?
Oh, it's in a 30-minute interview, it's very difficult to give you the whole thing. And because given the presentation, it's almost an hour. It's a big question. I'll just say this, Chris. People from all walks of life, doesn't matter what you do, we all come from something, right? We all come from something. We transition through life. Life is about transitions and transformations and all of these things. The things we learn, it's about getting older. I mean, getting older, we learn things about ourselves. And by the time we kick off the planet, we have built a body of knowledge based on all of our experiences. So I was a guy who was formerly a pack-a-day, 2-pack-a-day smoker, pretty unhealthy guy, who in the first part of my life, first half of my life until I was 30, was really quite unsatisfied with what I had not accomplished or what I wasn't doing, or what, I really had no passion in my life. And through a series of events and decisions, I was inspired by my younger brother to want to try something different. He's an adventure athlete, a climber, an Ironman triathlete, this sort of thing. And he inspired me so much to want to experience perhaps a tiny bit of the passion that he lived every day of his life.
Right.
that I stepped into that world. And I guess you could say I never stepped back out because I completely transformed my life 180 degrees. So I went from an unhealthy person who was somewhat sedentary, I wouldn't say completely sedentary, but somewhat sedentary, to someone who was, going around the world and doing all of these things. And I went from these endurance-based or risk-based adventures. And so I went from being a climber to being a mountain biker to being an ultra runner to doing what I do professionally now and have done since 2007, which is expeditions all over the world, across the world's hottest deserts and the coldest regions of the planet. So it's funny where I am now. If I look back over 20 years and I was only looking at the starting point, I never guessed where I'd be today. And that's what life is about. It's those series of moments that bring you from one place to the next. And so your life is constantly evolving, but you're also constantly reinventing yourself, even on smaller scales as you go.
I love it. And as I said, I was very inspired by your story. And as I was watching you, you're like talking about all these running these crazy distances under these crazy conditions in the Arctic. And I'm like, I'm the kind of guy that only runs when somebody's actually chasing you. So, but it is amazing the sort of the mental discipline it must take to do that. So maybe talk about that. Like, how did you develop that? It wasn't something that probably happened overnight. It probably took
Well,
focus.
it's through experiences and through doing the ultra marathons that I was participating in. If you recall, during my presentation, I told the story about how the very first foot race I
Right.
ever did was 160 kilometers, and I ended up winning it. I, you know, it's through the most difficult challenges we face, we learn the most about ourselves. And it's just another one of life's moments where there's consistently trade-offs in life. Even at the most basic level, you walk into a room and it's dark, you flick the light switch on, now there's light, right? There's
Right.
darkness and light, there's positive and negative. And so through difficulty can come great things. And each and every one of us is capable of doing something extraordinary in our lives if we're willing to take a risk. And I spent the first 30 years of my life being risk adverse. I wasn't willing to take any chances
Right.
for fear of failure or how poorly things may turn out or what someone might think of me if it didn't work out the right way. I mean, just all the wrong stuff. And through running, which I've often said has become my greatest teacher, I learned that, hey, you know what? Failing is okay. It's just the first attempt in learning, as a buddy of mine once used the acronym, or pushing ourselves and challenging ourselves. Sometimes greatness happens. Sometimes it's a setback, but we learn from that setback and we go for the next one. Then the greatness happens. So, it's a series of lessons. It's a series of processes that bring someone to a point where they can say, wow, here I am. Never thought I'd be here. Now, where do I go from here?
And not only you're an athlete, you're an entrepreneur as well, right? You building an organization of your own, also involved in charity. What are the parallels from the I would imagine from the risk taking, from the focus? What did you take from that you brought into being an entrepreneur, that you brought into, all the charity work that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you are, let's talk about the charity first, Impossible to Possible.
Right.
Charity, it's 501(c)(3) in the United States, and it's nonprofit in Canada. For the last, it's 2008, we've been taking young people between the ages of 16 and 21 on free learning-based expeditions all over the world. And what I mean by free is everything is paid for, door to door. They don't have to worry about anything. They're selected from a group of applicants, and they go to the Arctic, the Amazon jungle, the Sahara Desert, wherever we might be having the youth expedition that year. We have one youth expedition or two a year. So we've done, I think we're going on to our 17th or 18th youth expedition.
Wow, that's fantastic.
We're all volunteers in that organization. No one gets paid in that organization. So we're all volunteers. We love what we do, and we do everything we do for free. So right away from the beginning, the incentive is not to be profitable per se.
Right.
The incentive is to get these young people thinking and seeing at a much younger age how amazing they can be and the amazing things they can do, and then connect that by satellite to classrooms all over the world who are following along about the amazing things they're learning about themselves. You have to have the passion in order to get in and do something like that. You have to be driven by something other than finances to grow a business that's nonprofit. So what do I take from adventure to apply to the success of Impossible to Possible? Well, you, in preparation for an adventure, find the greatest challenge is not actually doing the expedition or the adventure, It's getting to the start line. It's all of the preparation. It's the training. It's the nutrition. It's the funding that makes it so difficult to get to that start line. Once you get there, things happen. That's when things start to come together. And there's a process that goes on autopilot. Any great entrepreneur will tell you the minute that they breach orbit with whatever it is that they're creating, then they're in a flow state. And things just start to come together because they've invested the time, they've invested the money to create what it is that they're entrepreneurial about. And that thing takes on a life of its own. It just goes. The train is on the tracks, so to speak. And so it's kind of the same thing with Impossible Possible. I've learned from Expedition that there's a huge front end process that's laborious and exhausting and emotionally demanding. But when you get through that, on the other side, the great things happen. And I've been able to apply that into business.
I love it. And so many parallels that you can see and those overcoming obstacles. So what do you do to keep yourself motivated? What habits have you built into your own business and into your life to keep you moving forward? I'd love to have a great chat with you about this. What are the habits that you're putting in each and every day? If you'd like to have a virtual coffee, just go to the link in the show notes and hit me up at our website. Let's put something in the calendar and happy to have a talk. Now, like every, whether it's an entrepreneur or what you're doing, how do you sort of choose your next goal? Is you try to make it more difficult? How do you make like your next quest? Like you've done quite a bit. I've gone through all of the
Well,
things that you've done.
I've crossed almost every large desert on the
Yeah.
planet on foot at this point. I mean, there's a few standing out there, but that's not the what is in my operating system that makes me want to do the next thing. Instead, internally, I have a desire to go and see a place or meet a people or explore a region of the planet, and that becomes the kernel by which the story of the expedition will grow. That'll be the next challenge that I'm doing. I, of course, love the physical challenge. I love the preparation. I love all those pieces that go into it, complexities of doing an expedition, because I've become very comfortable with the process. The process used to be very stressful when I was younger. It's not now because I know it so well that the stress gives way to exhilaration instead. And so for me, I choose the next trip based on where the mind's wonder goes
Right.
to, right? And where I want to be next, not for any other reason.
Right. So that natural curiosity brings you to the next challenge. And
Absolutely.
I think you could probably take a lot of entrepreneurs that way, that sort of built-in
Tell me,
curiosity that they have.
name one entrepreneur who wasn't a dreamer.
Exactly.
Because
Or
being an
have that.
entrepreneur is not a path of roses and daisies the whole way. You are from the get committing to process or a lifestyle that has no predictability, has no pension potentially.
Right.
It has no backup plan in a lot of cases, and it's either you're getting off the launch pad or you are gonna explode in a ball of flames. And that is something that the entrepreneur accepts as the terms and conditions pursuing their dreams. But it's that trade-off again that we talked about in life, right?
Yeah.
So entrepreneurs are dreamers.
Yep. I love it. Now, maybe you give us an example of, some of the obstacles that you had to overcome, as an ultra athlete. Like what were some of the things that, and maybe a concrete example of something that it was tough, but you did it and how you felt afterwards.
Well, there's injuries, and I crossed the Atacama Desert, which is 1,200 kilometers north to south in 2011 solo with minimal resupplies, meaning I would only see my crew once a day, twice a day, if you include camps. I was completely cross country in the middle of summer, 50, 52 degrees Celsius every day, headwinds all the time, driest place on earth. So excruciatingly dry air, full of salt in a lot of cases that would cross these salt expanses. And I was running somewhere between 60 and 80 kilometers a day, with a heavy backpack on. It was very difficult. At any rate, at the end of the first week, I got a little infection in my foot, a tiny little blister that blew up into this huge abscess on the bottom of my foot. And I reached a point where I could no longer move. And so I had to stop. And my buddy who was helping me out there, taking care of my but he's actually my business partner with Impossible to Possible and with my guiding company, Capic One. He was treating my foot at camp, and he's like, "Yeah, man, it looks pretty gnarly, you know." And says, I'd started taking antibiotics because I had a fever, it was infected, and cleaned it up as best we could. I looked at it, and the next day we modified my shoe. We cut it in half so that I could fit my foot into it, and my foot was wrapped in gauze. And I thought, you know what? I said to myself internally, I didn't say it to the guys. I said, you know what? To myself, I said, if I can get through the day today, no matter how far I can go, if I can get through the day today and it looks no worse at the end of the day, then I know I can get up the next day and continue this expedition and finish. If I get to the end of the day and it looks worse, I think I'm out.
Right.
Because I just will eventually be broken. And I went out 42 kilometers. I got a marathon. Might have been more, might have been 45. And I stopped. It was killing me. The pain was excruciating. And they took the bandage off, looked at my foot, and my buddy's like, yeah, dude, it looks pretty gnarly, but you know what? It's no worse than it was the day before. Ding. And right away I knew, you know what? I can get over this. And the next day I did 70, 70, 70, 70, 80, 70, 90. And I finished that expedition. By the time I was done that expedition, that blister healed.
No.
So
Really?
the mind and the body's ability to adapt during times of extreme and intense challenge is what makes us uniquely human.
That's an incredible story. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Wow. So then that would lead me to my next question, which is, how do you balance out this intense training and competition and doing all these things with rest and recovery and living your own life? Or is this all intertwined? Like, this is a thing I hear from entrepreneurs all the time, how much they get consumed by their business.
Well, as you know, you saw on my during my presentation last year, I had to deal with 6 months of chemotherapy from a rare form of blood cancer, a lymphoma that I have, and then coming out the other end of that, feeling like $1,000,000. I've learned with age that recovery is even more critically important than the workout or doing the things. So if you want to perform optimally, you have to set aside time for recovery in the same way that you set aside time to train, the same way that an entrepreneur says, all right, I'm putting in 12-hour days. Well, you better put in the recovery, or you're not going to be putting in many of those 12-hour days. You eventually burn out. So it's factoring that in as an equal and integral part of your success. The recovery is as important as the hard work.
Yeah, and it seems counterintuitive when, coming from a long line of workaholics, but it's true. What they say is world class. You need that rest. You need that time to actually be at your best, because if you're constantly doing it, well, to your point, burnout is a real thing. So I think that's a real valuable lesson that everyone can take out of that. So if you had to give entrepreneurs, a few pieces of advice to build their best life based on your experiences, what would those be?
Well, I think the number one thing is to remind yourself that you have a finite number of years on the planet. You're lucky if you make it to 80, because statistically that's the end point.
Right.
So, and you go further than that, that's awesome. You do less than that, I mean, you get hit by a car walking across the grocery street parking lot. Anything can happen. So it's to live each day and be observant in each day of the positives. And as it relates to and appreciative of those small moments in life every single day, and as it relates more specifically to an entrepreneur, is to be willing to celebrate those micro successes on the pathway to the bigger success that you're looking for. Is being willing to stop and say, okay, we've gotten this far.
Right.
Now let's take the next steps, and being able to be aware of where you are in that moment and on that thread until you reach that thread line, until you reach that success point, that to the entrepreneur, whatever their definition of success is, on the way to that, being able to stop and take a breath for a moment and say, okay, we got to here. Now let's go forward. Right. But it's being cognizant of that.
I think that's very, very good advice. So, of course, what's next for you? You've done so much. What keeps you going? What do you see on the horizon?
Well, I just finished guiding a group of clients, guys our age, out on, in the Mojave Desert on a trip with my business, Capic One. We had an amazing time. It's interesting because these fellows like you that, they're successful, they've achieved the things they wanted to achieve in business and life, and now they want to go and do something different, right? And so we go out there, we train them, we prepare them, and they go and do this challenge. So they were hiking with me through the mountains, beautiful mountains in the Mojave Desert for 3 days, carrying all their stuff with them. Next for me, I've got a couple more trips with that business. We've got another one with Impossible to Possible coming up. I'm traveling, with family, doing some trips, and I've got my own expeditions on the go. So there's never a shortage of things on the calendar.
I love it. Very inspiring. So now this segment of my show, I like to say my rapid fire questions. I'm going to ask you three
Yeah.
different questions and whatever comes to your mind. So, my first one is, and I have a general idea, but I think the audience says, so really what drives you? What drives you to do these impossible things?
Well, I think in every human being, it's naturally we have a sense of wonderment, adventure, and there's an explorer in every one of us. So I'm driven to go and do these things because I know what it's like to be out there on the edges of the planet, and what an amazing world we live in. And so I have a voracious appetite for wanting to see as much of it as I can before I kick off.
I love that. And so that leads to the second question, which was, what is the best interaction you've ever had? Most surprising interaction, with another part, maybe another part of the world. What would be something that's
Well,
very memorable to you?
probably running across the Sahara Desert, and we were it was 7,500 kilometer expedition across the Sahara, and we were in the middle of Niger, way out northern Niger in the sand dunes, and we came across a small nomadic community, a group of Tuareg people were crossing the desert, and they'd stopped and sort of set up camp for I'm not sure how long, but suffice to say, like a small community. And we were welcomed into the community very graciously. And this older lady was holding a goat, a baby goat, and she handed it to me. And the rest of the people from the community were there, and it was very small, maybe 30 or 40 people. And the goat was licking my face as because I was covered in salt, as I was hugging this little baby goat. It was so cute, and they were all laughing at me because I was hugging the goat. And I asked my buddy Mohammed, who was with us, who was translating, I said, "Why are they all laughing at me? I know I'm goofy looking." And he said, "They're laughing at you because you're hugging your dinner." So it was a gift to us. That was funny.
That is a good one.
Yeah.
I love it. And my last question to you is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice I ever received was from a friend of mine who was a fellow explorer, probably Canada's greatest polar explorer, Richard Weber, who said to me when his kids were younger, they've grown up and they're amazing young men. And I have my daughters 16 and 13 years of age. And when they were babies, I said to him, "Do you need some sort of good parenting advice, with these kids?" And he said, "Do as much as you can with your family. Travel with your family, do as much as you can with your family." Because he said, even though the kids will drive you crazy at various points and they'll become teenagers and they'll hate you for a while and all the rest of it, you still will always have that bond where they're willing to talk with you.
Right.
And I think that was the best advice ever.
That's some good piece of advice. So that's fantastic. So in summary, this is where I do a little rant. You know, what I've taken from what you've said is to be world class, it takes sacrifice, it takes focus, it takes training, long-term vision, but it's rewarding. You only get one shot on this planet. Do everything you can, take the risks that you can while you can take them, because those are the memories that you're going to have. But as far as that, you can also balance it out by, rest and recovery. And that's part of becoming a world-class athlete. And it's all part of it, and it's all worth it because you're doing all the things that people say are impossible, but you're making them possible. Hence your charity. So thank you so much for being on the show. Any final words for our audience?
Yeah, it's one last thing, Chris, I would say that I've learned from, I give presentations all over the world. I've met CEOs of mega corporations right on down to, small businesses. And the people that are the most successful approach success. The one common trait every one of these people has is humility. They are approachable, humble people that are willing to hear what others have to say. So I would leave that with people as well, that with great humility, humility is like the fertilizer for success.
I think that is the best way to leave the show. That's so fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show, Ray, and I look forward to following all of your adventures on Instagram.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me on Turning the Page. What did you learn from today's episode? If you follow me on LinkedIn, please drop me a comment there. I'd love to chat with you about it over a virtual coffee. Send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can do so at our website. The link's in the show notes. I'm Chris Reynolds, and until next time.